We're joined now by Charyna, owner of Saskatoon's Home Instead Senior Care, which provides private in-home or hospital care services. Greg, what are the dangers of social isolation for seniors? And talk a little bit about the importance of staying connected.
Well, sure. First, thank you to Carp and Zoomer for putting on such a fine event. I'm excited for the topic, and I think it's excellent that we're talking about how do we live the chapters of life that lay ahead of us. There's a lot of living to be done, and so to the topic about social isolation and disconnection and conversely connection. We know that, especially this last year, that being connected has been tough. And overall, we know that for seniors, particularly as we age, we run into challenges that impinge or hinder our ability to stay connected with loved ones and with family, and friends and our community. And the research is showing us that effectively social disconnection, isolation, loneliness is said to be the next world health crisis. That being lonely or isolated is the equivalent effect on our well-being as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And there's all kinds of research that talks about heightened increases for risk for aging adults with respect to depression and risk of heart attack. I think it's 30% of seniors, 1/3 of the Canadian population of seniors is said to be living in some degree of loneliness or isolation. 32% have an increased risk of stroke, and 64% have an increased risk for dementia. So those are troubling stats, and the antidote is to remain connected, to keep our close people close, and to figure out creative ways sometimes to do that, and we experience the health benefits when we can.
Social isolation was a problem before COVID. Many experts are warning that there will be an echo pandemic that's triggered because of COVID. You talked about some of those numbers. Do people contact you for help when they're lonely?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think people contact a home care company like us when they perceive that they need a little help doing some things. And if we listen right, and if we ask the right questions and we have the right conversation, sometimes it comes out that the client will say, really at the end of the day, I am kind of lonely. I look forward to, the person that you're going to send to me a few times a week to be my person, to have someone to talk to. My kids live far away, and my world, my circle is getting smaller as I age. So I really look forward to that. Like they know in themselves that they need that connection. Sometimes it's the adult son or daughter will call, and similar conversation. We talk about practical needs and helps and the things that we can do to help that person live in place successfully. And then they might mention, offhandedly or sort of in passing, really, I think mom's lonely. Dad died last year. Of course, she's still dealing with grief and loss, and, she can do a lot of the things around the house, but, I'm in Vancouver, she's in Toronto. The rest of the siblings live far away, and we think that really having somebody come on a regular basis would be really great for her, and that's really how we view our service, coming alongside family, being an extension of the family care team to provide at the heart of it that companionship piece, out of which all flows, all the practical things and living life to the best in the moment.
And we know that as children, we often try and do so much to take care of our parents, but I also know that caregiver fatigue is a real thing. So when should families start exploring options for this type of care?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it goes back to Marissa's question earlier for Miles and Cynthia. We have some research in our network that says when we hit our 40s, give or take, and our parents are in their 70s, that's actually a really good time to start a conversation around what we value, what our goals are, that's when, and the guide that we have is called the 40-70 rule, or the action plan for successful aging. And it's a way to get both generations connected and talking. So the younger generation might just say, as things are progressing here, as you age, what are your goals? Would you like to stay in your home? And if the answer is yes, and then, there's all the resources that we've been hearing about this morning that can be, researched and employed. And what we want to get at there is this open-handed, open-hearted, ongoing conversation about what matters most, what's still on your bucket list, and to factor in, how much is family able to help. The caregiver fatigue often happens for the spouse, right, who is, committed and there 24/7 and almost refusing to take a break because it's their role, right? And then the other is families that, are no longer in the same town and not able to provide that sort of contact and care. And so there's two parts to the equation, right? Introducing a little care, figuring out what the game plan is, provides excellent quality of life for the person that is living in place there, but it also provides great peace of mind for the rest of the family who are, either raising their own kids or living away and, starting to worry.
And what do your staff specifically do in the home then?
Well, a full scope of care, everything from, like I said at the beginning, the heart of our work is companionship, that one-on-one engagement and activity to understand a person's story and figure out what their goals are and talk with them about, what their plans are, how to support the rest of the family. So it could be everything from practical things like assisting with meal preparation and light housekeeping, driving to appointments or outings. These days, taking a client out of their residence or their home and even going through a drive-through for coffee, is a big thing, right? We help people with bathing, grooming, dressing, all the personal care items. We do a lot of work with folks that are living with some degree of Alzheimer's or dementia, because with good routines in a familiar place, with a familiar person, a familiar face and voice, our clients can stay at home much longer, super successfully. And so that gives you a bit of an idea of the scope.
Now, earlier you mentioned isolation is akin to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So, to put that into some, that has a huge impact on your physical well-being and on your mental well-being, of course, as well. What are some of the signs that we should be watching out for if we're concerned that maybe a family member may be starting to feel isolated or lonely?
Sure. I think there's a whole bunch of things, but the loneliness or the isolation, I think, really is a sign of a depression possibly, and so then a lack of ability to cope and manage the day-to-day things. So it could be anything from significant weight loss. If the house was tidy, forever when we were growing up, and now all of a sudden it's no longer up to the usual standard. If there's personal hygiene, maybe clothes that are a little bit disheveled, anything like that. A lot of dishes in the sink, or a lot of food that's gone to waste, or unopened mail. Those kinds of things might indicate that something's up, right? And the challenge, I think, is that for many of us, even if we do feel a little bit lonely, how many of us will admit it, right? If we ask our mom or dad, straight up, are you lonely? They will say something like, I'm fine, right? They're used to persevering and pushing through and managing. And so it really does require a lot of tender and sensitive kind of investigation, I suppose, and conversation.
So some of the indicators that you mentioned can show that someone is isolated are also very similar to someone who might have a mental health issue. And so do you work closely with the primary care provider to make sure that the client is getting all the care and making sure that nothing goes missed?
Ideally, yeah, that's the plan to, work with the family, and in sometimes there are folks where there has been a diagnosis, right? And once we know that, then we can work with whatever the care plan is and contribute to that to find ways to improve the situation if possible. And yeah, it really requires a lot of good communication. In some cases, we want to rule out anything medical that can be easily treated. In some situations, the client hasn't been to a doctor for a while, and so we want to first try to get that addressed, right? Rule out anything medical that can be addressed that way, and then look at what are the other issues that might be contributing to that isolation, that feeling of being alone, being disconnected from community, and so we really want to work with families in that way. Yeah, leave it there.
And, I would be remiss to not ask how COVID has impacted services. What do they look like today under these lockdown restrictions?
Well, for us as an essential service, it really hasn't affected us too much. In fact, I think we've seen an increase in families saying, listen, we want to keep our person in their home. And so we want to be proactive about that. And I love that. That's been the theme, I think, of this whole event. And so, we've been invited into many more family homes to work with families to say, well, how can we address current needs and anticipate some future things as aging conditions will happen, and scale service. And so it just reminds me of a story. 10 years ago, we had a gentleman in his late 80s at the time come in with his son to our office, and he assured me that he didn't need our help. He was fine. But the son and his sister, the two adult children, even knew back then that a little bit of care needed to be introduced. Their dad was starting to fail. There was a bit of confusion. Yes, he still lived in his own home and everything, but the son and daughter lived in the States, and they still do. And they realized that, as their dad's world got a little smaller, that a bit of proactive care would make a big difference. Well, flash forward 10 years, we've been serving this gentleman. He still lives at home. That was the big plan and the goal way back when, and we're able to do that. We've increased care over time. Now we're in the home a number of hours every day, but this gentleman gets to take his breakfast on the deck and enjoy the house that he's lived in for decades, and enjoy the plants and the flowers in the backyard. And so it has really good quality of life. And the kids have great peace of mind knowing that good ongoing care is happening from people that know their dad very, very well. And so I think that's really, a way that we can help people stay connected. We can do the video calls with their children when the person, really wouldn't be able to do that on their own. And we can facilitate those other visits, even in lockdown time. So it's more virtual visits, but hopefully as things open up again, we'll be able to manage things in a way that this person will feel like they're still well cared for and well connected with family and friends.
That's a great story. So what are the misconceptions that you have found that families typically have?
Well, I think some of the misconceptions would be, I don't know if it's a misconception, but maybe a misperception. And that would be that if they ask their mom or dad how they're doing, and mom and dad answer, fine, that they don't see the need for any help, then that's the end of the conversation. And in so many cases, the challenge for the adult son or daughter is we see something happening with mom or dad or both, and we can't ignore it anymore. But when we try to have the conversation with them, the response is usually, they're fine. They don't need anything. And so it really requires almost a deeper level of thought and reflection to understand that perhaps for the older person, and many Zoomers out there can tell me if I'm wrong, but there's a feeling like if I allow any help, if I acknowledge that I might need a little help, that's the beginning of the end. And I don't want that. So I want to stay in my house. But I don't want anything to change. And that's why we hit that resistance point. And kids feel like, I don't know how to talk to mom and dad, because, every time I bring it up, it's, there's pushback. And so we have to find ways to push through that conversation and really have that open-handed, open-hearted talk about, what you need, and what I need in terms of trying to provide care or trying to support you in your goals.
So with just a few seconds left, how can people get in touch with you?
They can find us at homeinstead.ca, and we'd love to talk to folks about trying to stay as connected as possible and to live in place by taking advantage of all these tools and resources to live life well.